Hi everyone. Today we're having tea with Albrecht Mahr. He has invited us to his home. Thank you for your invitation.
Gladly, thank you.
So can you introduce yourself and tell us about your expertise in working with family constellations?
So my name is Albrecht Mahr. I'm a physician and trained as a psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, and then learned the systemic approach. My first encounter with this approach was around 87. And it was a secret tip. It was Bert Hellinger, the founder of this work, who worked in a kind of a restaurant near the Austrian border, small groups. And he was about to retire, and my friend Gunther Weber invited some friends to meet him. And so he's a special therapist, you should learn to know him. And so that was my first workshop, and I was really very impressed.
So how did working with constellations inspired you?
So that I got hooked, that's many of my colleagues felt, to continue to learn more. Unfortunately, Gunther Weber succeeded to stop Bert Hellinger from retirement, which then resulted in Bert's largely public activities for many years, and he's now 91 and still traveling. And so I learned a lot from him, and then there were no other teachers around. And then learning from experiencing the work. In my psychotherapeutic practice, I introduced elements and found them and still find them very useful. Useful in the sense it got more essential, faster in a good sense, not hasty, but faster, profounder, and more effective. So that was all self-confirming experiences. Oh, I want to go on, I want to learn more. Yes, and the most intensive learning was the own practice, feedback of clients, failures. So life, yeah, and useful also in my private life together with my wife and family. We had quite some interesting family experiences in applying some of these elements, like seating order on the table, experimenting with that. Yeah, okay.
How unfolds a family constellation, and how can it help someone in health, wellness, relationships, and personal development?
Okay, some very basic information. Usually this approach is applied in groups. You can do it individually. We could work together constellation-wise, but the best setting is the group, and the client or issue holder comes in and has a question, and that's usually connected with some suffering or burden, and he wishes to resolve that. And that question is usually connected to people, as everything, his relationships. Even if he thinks it's only his own inner world that is put into question. So the first thing is we try to find out what exactly is your most intensely felt need that you ask this question. And then we, both the client and the facilitator, try to identify the elements, most people who are part of the question, but also sometimes abstract things like heritage or important toys or something. And once this is identified, the client is invited to find representatives for these elements and persons in group members. So he invites people, a man, can you please represent my father? Can you please represent my aunt, my sister? And someone for himself. And the next step then would be that he takes these people gently and intuitively places them in the space provided by the circle, the group. Then finally people are standing in the space representing others, and that is called a constellation. Now the most amazing and essential thing is that the representatives start to know things they had not been informed by normal informational ways. They feel on a physical level. The body is very expressive. I call that element the knowing body. And then emotions and feelings, the second layer of experience, and finally the mental level, memories, ideas, thoughts that come up. And when we carefully observe or listen to what representatives experience, that are the pointing elements to start a path through the constellation to answer the client's need or question. The most still amazing element, as I said, is this representative's perception. How could they possibly know of other people they never met? They have not much information, if at all, about. What is then the path of those absent people through the client to the representative, that we can make use of these informations? That is not yet answered. There's research on the way, but that is basically the unfolding of a constellation, at the end of which usually the client sees clear what he has not been able to see so far, what he has falsely connected. Like he thought he is only a good man if he always helps and puts himself in the second row. And so no, this is an old imprint, and it has this causation from my mother being ill from the beginning. Things like that. And these insights usually have not just an intellectual part, but the whole body is involved, and in the opening of a new space of more freedom, which then needs to be practiced, of course. One constellation does not change a huge conflict, but there's a beginning, as an opening. In very short words, that's a constellation.
Okay, thank you. You have worked with this method since 1978, 88. How do you look back on the developments in family constellations?
Well, very briefly. If you look at the old videos, you see a very directional method. That you move people around, you ask them to do this and to express this. So it's very, very much directed. It works very well. Yeah? And that is due to Hellinger's long years of experience to working not with that approach, but with many other approaches. And then a next phase was it is named Movements of the Soul. And that is basically a more self-organized approach. You have the constellation, then you wait. You not immediately do something, but you wait for the expressions that come through the representatives, and just you follow them. And you attribute to them some wisdom which I don't know as facilitator, the client doesn't know, but there is an implicit knowledge in that field, so to speak, that has a natural tendency to express itself if you don't stop it by too much intervention, too much interpretation, too much analyzing. And that phase was a real new gain in progress in constellation work, which is still very much appreciated and supported. And from there, Bert Hellinger named a new approach which I can't see in so much in its radical newness, which he calls movements of the spirit mind. That what moves is not the soul of a person or a group, but rather a much larger entity, the spirit. And there he says and believes in the fact that this is the basic and last moving element in human nature and human affairs. I think there's no real big difference. The biggest leap was from the directional to the more self-organized movements of the soul. And there, later the new movement that Hellinger called new led to a split in the Constellation community. And he founded his own school, Hellinger Scientia. And there was a strange estrangement between him and his colleagues, coming, visiting him, being friends with him from the first days. And so that is his approach, Hellinger Scientia, and a very big community of the rest of us, which is by far the majority, and not homogeneous at all. They're very different, large or small differentiations, like the structural constellations by Matthias Wager von Kibet and his wife Insa Spar, and so on and so on. But basically, they all use the same miraculous, wonderful phenomenon of representative perception, which, just one little remark, is not new. It's old. It's in old indigenous cultures you find that they use this. These people, like the Aborigines, use it. The Indians use it. The North American Indians, Canadian Indians, in a different way. The way we use it is just an elaboration and refinement of this phenomenon that you can represent someone you have never met and know about her things that you would not have imagined before. So this is all, we share all this as the core phenomenon, yeah? Which is never boring, and always surprising. And I never have seen that. I do that for 25 years now, and I have that often, over and over again. Yeah.
What impressed you the most with family constellations?
A few things. One is that it is indeed not a cultural approach being created in the West, which is true, but it works in every culture as far as we see now. We have tested many different places in the world. It works everywhere. Of course you have to, once you go to China and then you have a divorce issue, then you would ask, how are you dealing traditionally with a divorce in your culture? And there's no one Chinese culture, but where you are, where you hold a workshop, and then you learn something which might be different from our dealing with divorce or miscarriage or abortion or whatever. And still, the principle of asking representatives as tools to learn what are the people concerned in the divorce really experiencing. And you go with it while knowing in China, usually this is dealt with such and such. You would not impose your own ideas on another culture. Certainly not. But offer, and you can just see. And that is wonderful. It's really, all these differences on one level don't exist. Constellations are grounded in the groundwaters where we all are nourished from. Yeah? And look different and smell different and speak different languages. This is what I really like, yeah? That you on that level, all these hostilities because you're different don't make sense anymore. It simply don't make sense. It's self-damaging. And yet they are very powerful, even getting much stronger and stronger in all over the world. The nationalism and all these movements that claim we have the truth, but you are the poor, not knowing. Yeah. So this is learning that this transcultural validity is just very rewarding. There are other things I like, but this is perhaps the first that comes to my mind that I really appreciate. Yeah.
What will people learn in your training experiencing the spiritual essence of systemic constellation work? Or constellation work, as any good psychotherapy, deals with your biographical problems. You have been born in a certain family, in a certain community, and that leaves deep imprints on you. Yeah? And so usually, as in any good psychotherapy, people are bringing suffering from these biographical experiences into the group. Feeling restricted or feeling fearful when they want to unfold, no, you shouldn't, and so on and so on. So this realm of biographical imprints is a very important area of constellation work. And then you learn something interesting, which is once you have worked with these issues quite long and thoroughly, there's something that very naturally, which has been always there, comes into your experience, and that is the non-conditioned part of your being. And then you learn the latest, that you're not the product of your biography, parents, transgenerational transmissions. There is something that is untouched by all this. It can't be damaged. The hugest trauma can't damage this. And it comes into our field of perception very naturally. And that is clearly not because my grandmother was kind. I can feel that. That's important, a kind grandmother. But it has nothing to do with her. And this realm of the non-conditioned being is just very, to say the least, pleasant. Very rewarding. I think the deepest longing we share, mankind shares, is to experience that. Yeah? But there's no shortcut to it. You can't, okay, all this biographical shit, I go directly to the non-conditional. It doesn't work. It is always implicit in all our family stuff, but not easy to directly get to. Mm-hmm. We need to do our homework very, very thoroughly. If I hate my mother, I can't get spiritual. You know, the word spiritual, just to say that, is for me a little tricky. If you say, this is spiritual, then you say, for example, a church, the inner of a church is spiritual, but what happens in Syria is not spiritual. Who knows? So I think that distinction doesn't make much sense. Because who knows the difference of, is our conversation is probably closer to spirituality than a concentration camp. Yes, certainly. On the other hand, I rather keep that open. And I have the non-conditional realm of our soul's being is for me a more neutral term that doesn't bring the calamity that I have to define spirituality and non-spirituality. I am not able to define the difference. Yeah? So, insofar, the spiritual essence is perhaps just an attractive title.
but it doesn't meet reality as I see it. But if you write non-conditioned, that doesn't. It's too abstract for people. Yeah. So I use that term. Yeah.
It's a good term.
Yeah, spiritual is fine, but as I said, I need to, and I will in the workshop. Of course, I will explain a little bit what I think is more useful as a term, and not spiritual. You know, spiritual is the first step of division. I am spiritual, but the three of you are not spiritual. I can see that. What a bullshit. And this can lead to hostility. The right spirituality, like Shiite, Sunnite, is killing, is murderers. Yeah. So this is it's a dangerous term also, which I try to avoid.
Yeah. How do energetic transmissions take place from generation to generation?
I don't know. I think one thing is behavior. And my grandfather behaves according to a certain set of experiences, and his daughter or his son meets these behaviors, and they are, of course, influenced by that. And they unconsciously gain some directions. Don't do that, otherwise you will. It's perhaps unspoken, but it's in the behavior, and sometimes, of course, in the words that go with it. There may be also some, so to speak, non-material transmission, which is not connected to behavior, as I said. And that is very hard to define. I mean, the fact that there is transgeneral transmission is clear. There's research on it that's very clear. But how exactly it works is not yet fully explained. Good old Freud said in 1900, very early, said that there are no important facts in one generation that can kept secret to the next generation. Important. Although you try as good as you can. Doesn't work. So that is, Freud was a transgenerational practitioner and theoretician, but he would not be able to explain it. But the fact he saw that very early, right? And I like the Indian notion that, okay, I am here, before me are 7 generations that have an influence on me, that is at least 7 generations when you count 30 years for one generation, is more than 200 years. That what happened before, that has an influence on my worldview, self-perception, and 7 generations after me that I influence. Even if I have no children, that's not, but the people that live with me and that come after those people are influenced by the imprints I leave in my society. That's a nice community thought, transgenerational Indian community thought. And we call that, oh, these are primitive. It's a very modern idea to be embedded in these 14 generations flow, yeah? Which is an invitation to think of what I'm doing, right? Because it has an effect, even if I have no children. Yeah. That's all I can say about transgenerational transmission. Yeah.
So, what is the role of systemic constellations in the dynamics of social relations?
You know, we the constellation people, in the beginning, we had one of those typical childhood diseases that we thought we could create world peace through constellations. That was very obvious that we had these very proud and sometimes arrogant thoughts. And then it cooled down, this narcissistic position cooled down to more humble views. Okay, obviously the influence of a shift of consciousness in a client has an effect on his people. his children, his parents. But also, if somebody can find reconciliation with his father, and he is moved by that, and he starts to incorporate that relation to his father, and now he goes to a bakery and buys some bread. The way he will ask for bread will be different from 2 weeks ago. There will be more, I don't know, more presence, more calmness, more relatedness. I don't say, can I have a bread? Give him money and go. It's more likely that he looks at her, who sells it, and kindly asks for a bread. Right? So this is a little social effect. On the largest scales, I don't know. We did September 11 constellations. The Muslims, the Americans, the Twin Tower, blah, blah, blah. It was just lukewarm air. You understand? Lukewarm air, no. It was interesting. You can do September 11 constellations if there's somebody who was immediately involved. The wife of a fireman who was killed. And she is deeply involved in this whole thing. Then you can do that and include the larger context. But just l'art pour l'art, I think that's not very helpful. It's good just to think big and act small. That helps here again. And to see the little ripples that perhaps don't go all over the world, but they touch a few in some way. And that's good enough, I think. Yeah. And just to say that, a Vipassana teacher I had for some years, by the name of Ayakema, she used to say, meditation is the best kind of social work. So you sit on your cushion and you perhaps clarify some of your confusions in your mind, and that has an effect on your surrounding. Yeah? I think that is a good little idea, and probably to a certain degree realistic. Yeah.
What is the role of systemic constellation in the dynamics of social relations?
Yeah.
Can you explain what is presence?
Yes. For example, presence is when for a moment I just feel my feet. And then from there perhaps my legs and my hands and my arms. So the body is very, very crucial and central in that, being present. That is where presence is anchored in. Yeah. And then you may include, it's difficult, that is a difficult practice to be present. And you may include, what is my present experience? Which is never stays, it's moving, what kind of feelings, of thoughts. Presence is also to realize the surrounding, or what is right now here, and then that touches the tricky issue, what is now. If you define now, it is the moment-to-moment thing, then that is a very excited non-definition, because it's gone. All the time it's gone. Now is different. Now is more the space from which all these phenomena arise and disappear. And to not only intellectually know that, but to incorporate that is very demanding, right? But a good little thing is, in the midst of whatever you do, feeling my feet. That's what I do. Yeah. I was watching a presentation by somebody and he was talking about some Which I don't remember. But in the midst of his talk, he suddenly said, and now let's feel our feet. Huh? Yes, please. You're too distracted in thoughts, I'm too distracted in, I have to do this good and well, let's feel our feet. Silence. And then he went on. And 20 minutes later he invited us again to that, and I liked that. It was good. All these many listening, associations, bodily perceptions, was for a moment gently focused on the contact with the ground, right? So that is for me a very nice short definition of presence, feeling my feet, with all these huge implications in it. Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Dear audience, thank you for being with us. If you'd like to learn more about Albrecht Mahr and family constellations, please visit our website www.unlp.nl.